ladies and gentlemen. My name is Salim Amin, and I am an African. Those images of Ethiopia changed the world. They prompted the greatest act of giving in the 20th century. They changed the way governments and NGOs operated in Africa and other developing continents. More importantly, they saved the lives of 3 million people. Let me say that again. They saved the lives of 3 million people. I grew up with those images. They were taken by my father, Mohamed Amin. He covered this famine and every other disaster on this continent for 4 decades. He died negotiating with terrorists aboard a hijacked Ethiopian Airlines plane that crashed in the Comores a decade ago. But this was not the Africa that he loved, or that he wanted to portray, nor the stories that he enjoyed doing. Don't get me wrong, he lived for the world exclusive. He lived for the scoop. It was like a drug to him. But he loved the people, the culture, the history, and the beauty of Africa more. My father had to struggle to get these images covered in the international media, a media that had no interest in Africa, even in the catastrophic famine and the desperation of the Ethiopian people. 20 years ago, he made a speech in the United States while receiving one of his many awards for the Ethiopian famine coverage. He said, "You may find it hard to believe now, but when my first report about the famine in Ethiopia was offered to Europe and America's broadcasters, they turned it down. But when the viewers saw it, they proved beyond all question that they were not as small-minded as some of the people that run the media. The power of television news could not be demonstrated more clearly. But there is a responsibility that goes with that power. We fail in that responsibility if we do not report the often horrendous problems of development facing the people of Africa. We must report them courageously and without favor. If we can do that, then we can trust the people of the world to see that their governments will take their responsibilities to the third world seriously. And if that happens, I believe the day will quickly come when no child, man or woman, anywhere need ever go hungry to bed or starve to the grave." He was making a plea to the West to take responsibility for their commitments to the developing world. 20 years on, I am asking Africans and anyone interested in Africa to take our responsibility to our continent seriously by raising the voice of Africans, reporting on Africa for Africans. I would like to share a vision, a dream. It's called A24, Africa 24, the first truly independent, Pan-African 24-hour news and information channel. A voice for Africa by Africans, but a commercial entity that will prove that we can set up a successful business model that will not only tell the real story of Africa, but will also be a commercial success. The footage that you saw at the start is an extract from a documentary, Mo and Me, that I made last year, my journey back into discovering who my father was and why he did the things he did. I lived with a legend in the world of the media, and frankly, I had no idea how influential he was until he died. But I followed in his footsteps, in spite of him telling me to get a real job. It's important that some of the biggest African stories of the 20th century were covered by an African. What my father taught me was that Africa can only be covered by Africans. And he proved it time and time again. He knew this continent like no other journalist, definitely better than any other foreign correspondent. He had an unmatched contacts book, and he made sure he got in when no other journalist could. While some of what he achieved makes me very proud, some of the stories that he covered and that made him famous do not make me and did not make him proud. We've been talking about the damaging impact of the stereotypical portrayal of Africa in the media. That the photos that my father took still represent much of what people think of Africa 20 years on, reflecting the typical images of Africa that we continue to see on international news channels: starving children with flies in their eyes, executions, genocide, is one of the key challenges that we in Africa face. We can only combat that trend if we have true influence on what is reported, covered, and said about Africa. And hence we need our own independent, high-profile, professional news channel. In a world with perhaps too many 24-hour news channels, you may be asking why we need another one. The answer is Africa doesn't have one. We have 900 million people on this continent. We don't have a voice. We continue to have to rely on the international media to determine what is newsworthy in Africa, to shape our own vision of ourselves. India alone, for example, has 32 24-hour news channels. We have heard CNBC and SABC being mentioned as Pan-African channels. I welcome these initiatives, but they're not fulfilling the role that I envisage. CNBC is an excellent business channel, but it is not African-owned. And SABC is largely South African-focused and is South African government-funded. In my opinion, it's compromised. We are different in every corner of this continent. We have different histories, different cultures, and many, many different languages. But we need to talk to each other. We need to understand all these differences. We need to share our successes, and we need to jointly fight our problems and our failures, many of which are similar: HIV, malaria, education, corruption, human rights. Outside of local or national news, a medium doesn't exist at the moment to inform Africans about their own continent. News from other countries comes sporadically, mostly through non-African sources, which, as I said before, mainly focus on the negative news agenda. We in the media have the power to influence millions of people and make a real difference. In my ideal Africa, we would have our own voice, one that might not be united, may not be popular, may be downright disagreeable, but it has to be African. The A24 Media Project represents a milestone for Africa, a company that will establish a continent-wide 24-hour news and information channel that will change the face of African media. The channel will train hundreds of journalists, set a new and balanced African news agenda, communicate relevant information about healthcare, the environment, business, art, music, sport, and other cross-border issues. We will create economic opportunity and develop a new vehicle for educational and social programming. Already from my father's passion stemmed the Mohamed Amin Foundation, a broadcast training school that I set up in Nairobi 9 years ago to train African journalists to the very highest levels of broadcast journalism. This school proves to me year after year the immense talent we have on this continent. And while I've been watching these sessions with huge interest over the last 3 days, I've been thinking of all the features A24 will do on the remarkable people and companies present here. I guarantee you that most Africans have no idea of the wonderful things the Africans here are doing. They need to know. The channel will offer breaking news, multifaceted analysis, and a platform for sharing ideas between Africans from across the continent. A lot of people I know, and in previous presentations that I've made on this topic, are shaking their head, saying, how is this possible? It is possible now because of advances in technology. Unlike previous attempts in past decades, A24 will rely on 46 low-cost high-tech bureaus around the continent. The channel will be transmitted into rural Africa on a variety of platforms, including direct-to-home satellite platforms, the internet, radio, and most importantly, cell phones. The signal will be offered to all terrestrial broadcasters on the continent free to air, mainly because we never get paid by them, even if we did bill them. Revenues will come from advertising, global satellite subscriptions, sponsored programming, and the sale of content to international broadcasters. A private equity company has been set up in Mauritius, and a poison pill has been put into the system to ensure that no investor, no shareholder will ever own more than 20% of the company, thus ensuring its editorial independence, and essential for the credibility of this channel. The impact of this channel, enormous. On every level of society, we'll be empowering Africans to speak their vision of the past, present, and future of Africa, uniting and opening a dialogue, if not immediately with the rest of the world, then at the very least around the continent. We will empower Africans with the most powerful tool in the world, knowledge. And we hope the channel's presence and reporting will create an impetus for good governance, both in public life and in commerce. Bono spoke earlier about the need for good governance, about democracy on this continent. In my opinion, none of this is possible without a strong, independent media to hold those politicians and those people accountable. I started as if I was addressing an AA meeting. For many Africans, for many years, it was almost embarrassing to own up to being an African. No more. We are proud of what we have built and have achieved. And the last 4 days here have been proof of this. Many of you around this room can and are helping to make this channel a reality. Stand up and be counted. Africans cannot live on words. Our time is now. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.